Rudy Benson has been brought to viewers like you. Thank you. The Dark Crystal. A film that once seen cannot be forgotten has been getting a lot of love as of late. There's now been 3 comic series, a novel series, a manga series, lore books, and an upcoming Netflix series. All of this from a film from one of the most beloved creatives to exist, talented men and women putting their hearts and souls into beautiful and moving performances, striking imagery, and an actual breathing world that many filmmakers today struggle to achieve with the best special effects available. The film that most people in 1982, upon seeing the film, said, "It's alright." While the film was financially successful, it wasn't critically well received. Most of the praise went to the technical aspects, whereas the story and characters weren't so well received. For my quick thoughts, I definitely see where Jim was trying to go with this film. It's not so much the story as it is the emotions of seeing good prevail over evil, with a hero story that is tried and tested. However, I've always been of the opinion that this is the ending to a story that we're missing the beginning and middle of.
The story runs deeper than you know.
Considering this film did well financially, there were a lot of developments to have a sequel made. Plans stalled out since Jim's second serious film attempt, Labyrinth, did even worse than The Dark Crystal financially and critically, even though the film is known as a cult hit film today. While there was talk again about a film being made after Jim's death, personal and story problems meant that the film never really came to pass. However, the Dark Crystal franchise has been slowly running in the background for the past 37 years, notably in the 2010s. This has taken the shape mostly in the form of comics, such as today's topic, The Power of the Dark Crystal.
You want to know what this is all about? Is that it, Gelfling? You don't know?
This is a 12-issue miniseries released by Archaea in 2017 to coincide with the 35th anniversary of the film. Written by Simon Spurrier, who is currently working on the Dr. Aphra Star Wars comics, and with art by Kelly and Nicole Matthews, who along with this have done covers for Faith. They also sell their art on Etsy. What's interesting is that this series is actually based off one of the original ideas for the Dark Crystal sequel that never came to be. So before I get into the power of the Dark Crystal, you might be hearing a bunch of videos talking about the Dark Crystal film itself, with recaps everywhere. Here's another one. I'll be brief. So there's 2 major races on the world of Thra, the bad guy Skeksis and the good guy Mystics. The Mystics have a Gelfling named Jen. Gelflings are thought to be an extinct race. Surprise, they're not. Jen's destiny is to fix the Dark Crystal. If he doesn't, the Skeksis will reign over Thra forever. He teams up with Kira, a female Gelfling, and Fizzgig, a... There's also Chamberlain, aka your new favorite character. Alright, you got all that?
No.
100 years after the original film, everything is seemingly thriving again, with podlings and even gelflings back on Thra. All the different tribes on Thra tried to the best of their abilities to make sure that the crystal is never cracked again. This takes the form of a sect of gelflings forcing other tribes to pay tribute to the crystal by placing gifts around and next to it. While everyone organizing the tributes is just as corrupt as you'd expect, especially the Eminence taking far more joy in this than he should, they're not all bad.
I don't understand.
Kensho is a young acolyte with scar on his face who works with these gelflings in the organization of tributes, but he isn't above helping others with their tributes. He offered himself after a blight started to affect him and his people. While the crystal was able to save his family and his clan, he offered himself as tribute since they had nothing else. One day, a fireball appears in the forest and out comes Therma, a fireling, a brand new species to everyone living on Thra, and quickly branded a demon by the Eminence. Therma is here on a mission. As it turns out, her world and her people are slowly dying. With her arrival, Jen and Kira, who have been asleep the whole time, wake up as Therma makes her case. She asks to take a shard from the crystal to save her people. Naturally, chaos ensues. Now, I'm not going to go over the entire story since I really suggest you check this out for yourself. I will, however, say that it's pretty good. This feels like a real step up from the original film, which is really hard to do on its own. While I really do enjoy the film, I will say that I'm the first to admit that Jen and Kira weren't really the strongest of protagonists. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the two. They were fine enough, and they get a little bit more to do here, but our two new main leads, Kensho and Therma, are more than capable of taking the reins as main characters this time around. We see the two play off each other really well like young teens with, actual personalities. Therma is easy to anger with injustice and deceit, and Kensho, while charitable, is more than capable of deception. The two really complement each other as we learn about firelings and the slow realization that they like each other, and that the two have more in common than one originally thinks. I also love how this expands on the concepts and creatures from the original film. We get to see more unique creatures this time. How just because Jen and Kira tried to make a perfect world, it's still flawed. The Mystics might be able to do more than originally imagined in the first film. This series also carries the same vibe as the film, in that it feels like a story you would hear from a fairy tale book.
And what are those funny marks?
Oh, this is all writing.
What's writing?
Words that stay. My master told me.
For a 12-issue miniseries, it's actually paced really well, for the most part. There isn't a lot of downtime, and when there is, it's important. That isn't to say that there aren't any problems with the pacing. Since this is a comic, there's been this rule for a while that most single issues are designed to eventually be collected into a trade, or a series of volumes. As such, there are some pacing issues here and there. Not a big issue, but near the middle is where it slows down, and some scenes can drag near the end. However, my favorite part of this series is easily the art. The Matthews really know how to make the art pop in just the right areas. This art style really reflects the warmth that the crystal emanates to renew the land. While simplified, nobody looks bad, and almost all the characters are quite distinctive. It especially shows in Therma and when we see anything to do with fire. There are points in the story where the art is a bit too simple. There are some scenes with the Skeksis when they're in the dungeons, and it's kinda hard to keep track of who is talking. This is somewhat fixed by having bits of color mix, and some of their wardrobe is kept, but it's still a bit confusing to keep track of who is who.
It's time to make my move.
So I'm gonna go a little in depth with the story, and especially the ending. I'm gonna basically be spoiling the ending, so just in case you don't want to see it, here's the timestamp. Skip to that point, okay? So when all is said and done, this story does feel a bit like a copy of the Dark Crystal. Two Gelflings are carrying the shard, Chamberlain is trying to get the shard, and, in the end, the Urskeks appear and basically give Kensho and Therma the same responsibilities as Jen and Kira before they die? I guess die. I'm not saying this is bad at all, but this feels like the Force Awakens of the Dark Crystal. There seems to be some inconsistencies within the story itself. Like, what does it take to kill a Skeksis or a Mystic? In the film, one of them fell down a fiery shaft and was killed. Yet we go where Therma lives, which is heavily affecting Kensho, and yet Chamberlain is there and he's fine. He gets slammed against numerous rocks, and he's fine. Also, at the very beginning, when the shard is taken, it appears that the Skeksis and Mystics just pop out of the crystal, when in the film, the Urskeks left and weren't trapped in the crystal. The cracking of the crystal wasn't even what created the Urskeks in the first place, but, I mean, that's a whole nother topic.
The story runs deeper than you know.
I say all this, and these are problems, but it's not like the series has been consistent the whole time anyway, without some sort of retcon or mistake. Of course, I have to bring up that one of the previous miniseries, The Dark Crystal Creation Myths. This was a 3-volume graphic novel series that detailed the creation of the Dark Crystal, Aughra, the coming of the Urskeks, and the birth of the Skeksis and Mystics. I decided to go ahead and read these 3 and see if there was anything from this series that would carry over into Power of the Dark Crystal. And
No.
all in all, I highly recommend you check this series out. There's even a sequel to this series called Beneath the Dark Crystal, which continues the adventures of Kensho and Therma. I'm really curious to see if anything from the comic will be mentioned in the new Netflix series, as it's the best time to bring everything together. I'm really excited to see where the series is going to go after this, Beneath and the new Netflix series. I believe, unlike other efforts by the Jim Henson Company as of late,
Is Phil in? He's servicing a client.
Is that what I think it is?
People might be more receptive for a weird and out there idea like the Dark Crystal. Or not. Who knows?
Is that what you want to know?